You know the snow will slowly melt, but my love will never die.
The disappearance of Leeanna Susan Marie Warner. Missing since June 14, 2003. Missing from Chisholm, Minnesota. Classification: endangered missing. Sex: female, race white. Date of birth: January 21, 1998. Age 5 years old. Height and weight: 3 feet 0, 3 feet 2, 48 pounds. Clothing jewelry description: a sleeveless dark blue denim dress, some agencies call it a shirt, with an attached belt, orange Hanes underwear, a flower-shaped earring with a red garnet in her right ear, and no shoes or socks. Distinguishing characteristics: Caucasian female. Brown hair, dark brown eyes. Leeanna has a mole or wart just above her left ankle, and a dimple on the back of her left shoulder. Her nicknames are Beaner and Little Beaner. Her hair was cut in a shoulder-length bob at the time of her June 2003 disappearance, and her ears are pierced. Her name may be spelled as Leeanna, Leanna, or Leanne, or she may be referred to as Leeanna Marie Warner. Leeanna Warner was a young girl who disappeared from the city of Chisholm, Minnesota, on June 14, 2003, in a suspected abduction and murder. On the day of her disappearance, Leeanna was last seen walking home from a friend's house between 5 o'clock and 5:15 p.m. She was last spotted walking on Southwest 2nd or 3rd Street. At the time of her disappearance, Leeanna was 5 years old. Although there is no concrete evidence that Leeanna was kidnapped, the police argue that it is the more realistic option, believing that they would have found her if she had simply wandered off. Over the years, the police have received more than 1,700 leads. However, with very little evidence to go off, they have never had a concrete suspect. As of 2023, Leeanna has not been found and her case remains unsolved. The Warner family includes Tiffany Kaylin Whitaker, who preferred to go by Kaylin Whitaker, Christopher Warner, and their daughter Leeanna Warner. Leeanna's parents had both previously been divorced. Christopher and Kaylin met and moved in with one another towards the end of 1996, and Kaylin gave birth to Leeanna on the January 21, 1998. The Warners had only moved to Chisholm a few months prior to Leeanna's disappearance. Leeanna was described as being an outgoing, friendly and very brave child, with survival instincts that were considered to be quite advanced for her age. She enjoyed playing with dolls, riding her bike, and spending time with her family. Kaylin also was charged for a hit-and-run for hitting Christopher with her car in October of 2003. Kaylin died on December 10, 2022. On June 14, 2003, Leeanna was last seen walking barefoot home from her friend's house, which was approximately a block and a half away from her own home. Kaylin Warner informed the authorities that they had just returned home from the Side Lake rummage sale. Despite Kaylin's protests that Leeanna needed to rest, her daughter decided that she wanted to go play with her friend, who lived only a few streets away. Kaylin gave her permission to go as long as Leeanna was home by 5 p.m. Leeanna made the commute to her friend's house at 4:30 p.m., a short walk that her parents say she had done many times on her own. However, upon her arrival it was apparent that there was no one at home at her friend's place, so she decided to turn around and go home. Leeanna was last seen walking on Southwest 2nd or 3rd Street, between 5 o'clock and 5:15 p.m. By 5 p.m. Leeanna had not returned home and her mother began to panic. At around 5:30 p.m. Kaylin began the search for her daughter, enlisting the help of people in the neighborhood. Parents and children from the surrounding suburbs gathered together to search for Leeanna. By 9 p.m., despite the extensive search party, there had still been no sighting of Leeanna. It was at this stage that Kaylin and Chris reported their daughter missing to the local police. Victim's appearance. At the time of her disappearance, Leeanna stood between 3 feet 0 inches, 0.91 m, and 3 feet 2 inches, 0.97 m, and weighed approximately 50 pounds, 22.7 kg. She is described as being a petite, Caucasian female, with brown hair. Her hair was cut into a short bob cut at the time of her disappearance. She had dark brown eyes. Leeanna has two main distinguishing characteristics, one being the mole above her left ankle and the other being a dimple on her left shoulder. The last thing that Leeanna was seen wearing was a sleeveless blue denim dress, some sources state a denim shirt, with a belt, orange underwear, a flower earring with a red garnet in her right ear, and no shoes or socks. Investigation. The Chisholm Police Department arrived on the scene shortly after they received the phone call from the Warner family. Another search party was sent out, this time including the aid of the authorities. A combination of police, firefighters, local volunteers and expert trackers with bloodhounds gathered to search the town. They checked garages, barns, sheds and abandoned iron ore mines in the hopes that Leeanna had simply wandered off and gotten lost. The group searched for over 48 hours but were unable to find anything that hinted at what happened to Leeanna. In the weeks following her disappearance, authorities held an extensive search that included helicopters and bloodhounds, but by the end of the month they were not any closer to finding Leeanna. A month after Leeanna vanished, a local townsperson came across a child's footprints near Longyear Lake, the lake Leeanna was at with her mother on the day of her disappearance. The Chisholm Police Department had the lake drained in an attempt to locate Leeanna or her body, but they found no other evidence of her being there. They were forced to stop their search over the winter as the lake and the surrounding areas froze over. In the summer of 2004, the authorities began a new search of Chisholm in another effort to find Leeanna's remains, but no new evidence surfaced. Since then there have been no further official searches scheduled. In 2020, Chisholm Police Chief Vern Manor said, "We still have several persons of interest in the fact that we cannot call them suspects because we don't have any evidence, but we have people that we can't clear out either." Suspects and theories. There are a number of suspects and theories associated with what happened to Leeanna Warner. However, to this date none of them have been proven true. Kaylin Whitaker, Christopher Warner and family. Kaylin and Christopher were never considered suspects and they were not required to take lie detector tests. However, Christopher had been having domestic problems with his ex-wife and had even sought out a restraining order on her. He also claimed that she had made threats towards Kaylin and Leeanna. Despite this information, authorities felt that Christopher's previous problems with his ex-wife were not connected to his daughter's disappearance. Years after Leeanna's disappearance, Kaylin and Christopher moved away from Chisholm to try and start fresh, claiming the town no longer felt safe, or like home, to them. Matthew James Curtis. One of the main suspects that was identified as potentially having a role in Leeanna's disappearance was a man by the name of Matthew James Curtis, who was aged 24 at the time. In August 2003, Curtis was arrested for possession of child pornography. He was interrogated a number of times by the police about whether or not he had anything to do with Leeanna's case. Due to his prior charges and his proximity to Leeanna, authorities suspected that Curtis had played a role in the young girl's disappearance. They were granted a warrant and searched his pickup truck for DNA samples. However, an extensive search of his trucks and his belongings revealed that there was no evidence that Leeanna had ever been in the vehicle. Therefore, there was no way to directly connect Curtis to the case. In September 2003, the day before he was supposed to appear in the local court for the child pornography charges, Curtis' corpse was found in his pickup truck, a few miles out of Chisholm. Authorities claim that Curtis suffocated himself with a plastic bag. The investigation into Curtis's death was closed and officially ruled a suicide. However, there was a great deal of speculation and controversy surrounding his death, with some believing that Curtis was murdered and that his body was positioned to make it look like a suicide. Currently, there is no evidence to support this claim. Joseph Edward Duncan III. Joseph Edward Duncan III was a convicted sex offender who was accused of kidnapping 2 children in Idaho. When the authorities were going through his computer for an unrelated case, they came across an encrypted document which made reference to Leeanna's disappearance. Duncan also kept an online diary, and in 2004, Duncan wrote in this diary, explaining that he was afraid that he was going to be blamed for the disappearance of Leeanna Warner. He also discussed his dissatisfaction with the investigation into him and his discontentment with being labeled a sex offender. His knowledge of the missing Minnesota girl led to an investigation about whether he had anything to do with the young girl's disappearance. However, the authorities could find nothing concrete to put him on trial. A timeline of Duncan's most recent activities also revealed that he had not been in the Chisholm area at the time of Leeanna's alleged abduction. A little old lady. Christopher and Kaylin told authorities that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Leeanna had been behaving strangely. One afternoon, Leeanna's parents came home to her playing with a case filled with Barbie dolls and their clothes, despite them never having purchased the toys for her. When Kaylin asked her where she had gotten them from, Leeanna said that she had been given them from a little old lady. A week prior to her disappearance, Leeanna packed a suitcase with all her favorite things and told her parents that she wanted to go live at her new family's house. They also found her sleeping in her closet one night, claiming that she was afraid that monsters outside her window were going to get her. Investigators looked into this and determined that there was no evidence to indicate that anyone had used toys to lure Leeanna away from her family. The information was dismissed. At the time of Leeanna's disappearance, numerous witnesses recall seeing a man in his mid-30s walking around the neighborhood. He was described as being approximately 5 feet 10 in, 1.78 m, tall and around 155 pounds, 70 kg. He allegedly had a dark tattoo of a star or a sun on his right arm. This man has not been identified. Around the same time, witnesses identified a maroon and blue Cadillac that was driven by an African-American man who appeared to be in his 20s or 30s and had a bald or shaven head. There were also accounts of an unfamiliar older model rusty brown pickup truck that was driven by a Caucasian man with black curly hair. None of these men have been identified and it remains unclear whether any of them had anything to do with Leeanna's disappearance. The 5-year-old walked off to visit a friend and was never seen again. When 5-year-old Leeanna Warner arrived home from a day out with her family, the first thing she wanted to do was visit her best friend and tell her all about her day. Her mother, Kaylin, tried to convince her to come inside and take a nap, but Leeanna was persistent. She pleaded to be allowed to go down the street to her friend's house, and Kaylin relented. She told her daughter to be home by 5 p.m. and watched as she skipped off down the street. It was 4:30 p.m. on Saturday, June 14, 2003, and it was the last time Kaylin would see her daughter. Leeanna was an outgoing, fearless, and extremely energetic little girl, and she was well known in their Chisholm, Minnesota neighborhood. Chisholm was a small town of 5,000 residents, and it was thought of as a quiet and safe place to raise a family. Leeanna was best friends with a child who lived down the street from the Warners, and she would walk to her house to visit her on a daily basis. Chris and Kaylin Warner were comfortable letting their daughter go by herself. The walk took less than 2 minutes and didn't require crossing any streets. Leeanna was the kind of child who liked to frequently check in with her mother. She was constantly running back and forth between her home and her friend's house. Kaylin was busy doing a few things around the house, so it was 5:30 p.m. before she realized that Leeanna hadn't returned home yet. She walked down to Leeanna's friend's house to see if she was still there, and was startled to learn that they hadn't seen her all day. The family had just returned from a shopping trip. They weren't home when Leeanna attempted to visit. Several neighbors had seen Leeanna knock on the front door, but she had left once she realized no one was home. She then headed back in the direction of her own house, and the neighbors assumed she was going home. Fighting panic, Kaylin began searching the neighborhood. No one knew where Leeanna was, and the number of people looking for her grew with each home Kaylin visited. Soon, most of the neighborhood was out searching for the missing child. Everyone expected to find her at any minute, but by 8:30 p.m. it was clear that something was seriously wrong. Kaylin called the Chisholm Police Department and reported her daughter missing. Although there was no evidence that foul play had taken place, the fact that Leeanna was so young was a concern to police. They immediately launched an intensive search of the area, and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Investigation sent out a statewide alert that a young child was missing. They did not issue an Amber Alert because there was nothing leading them to believe an abduction had occurred. The search continued overnight, but investigators were unable to find anything to help them locate Leeanna. Sunday was Father's Day, but there was little to celebrate in Chisholm. Hundreds of police officers and volunteers continued searching for the missing girl, and members of her family quickly had flyers printed up and began distributing them throughout the area. Representatives from 6 different law enforcement agencies participated in the search, and a local elementary school was transformed into a makeshift command center. Searchers combed through every building, yard, garage, and shed within a 4-mile radius of where Leeanna was last seen. They checked inside parked cars, under porches, and in garbage cans. They made sure to check every space where a small child might fit. There was a chance Leeanna might have been scared by all the searchers and tried to hide herself from their view. Despite their thoroughness, they found no trace of the little girl. Bloodhounds were brought in, and they were able to track Leeanna's scent from her home to a shallow lake 2 blocks away. Worried that she might have ended up in the water, searchers scoured the lake and surrounding marshland. Search crews from the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office arrived with their hovercraft to assist in searching the water, and volunteers on ATVs could be heard buzzing around several areas near the lakefront. They found nothing that indicated Leeanna was at the lake, and it appeared the bloodhounds may have picked up on an earlier trail. Leeanna and a friend had gone to the lake the day before Leeanna went missing. The girl's mother told police she had walked down to the lake with them so they could release some turtles back into the water. Police later announced that they were confident Leeanna was not going to be found in the water. By Monday morning, investigators still had no idea what had happened to Leeanna. Detectives had gone door to door in the neighborhood, interviewing residents and asking if they remembered seeing anything unusual the day Leeanna disappeared, but they still had no solid evidence of foul play. No one had seen or heard anything that led them to believe that the child had been abducted, and police had no crime scene to investigate. They told the media that the case was still classified as a missing child investigation, but stressed that they were unable to rule out the possibility of a kidnapping. Until they could come up with more information, they weren't going to rule out anything. Chris and Kaylin attended a press conference on Monday and made a tearful plea for the return of their daughter. They believed that Leeanna had been abducted, and they said they would not stop searching until they found her. Police told the media that they had received more than 300 tips in the first couple days of the investigation, but they had been unable to develop any solid leads. The search area was expanded on Tuesday, and investigators were optimistic that Leeanna was still alive. Although she had been missing for nearly 72 hours, the temperature had been mild and there had been no rain. Even if she were lost outside, it was possible for her to survive under these conditions, but they needed to find her soon. In addition to searchers on foot and ATVs, several helicopter crews were dispatched to conduct aerial searches. Although Leeanna had never strayed far from home before, volunteers extended their search to include areas outside the Chisholm city limits just in case the 5-year-old had managed to wander off further than expected. Once again, the day ended without finding any trace of the little girl. On Tuesday, investigators admitted that they were no closer to finding Leeanna than they had been on the night she disappeared. They were frustrated by the lack of progress in the case, and recognized that if she had been lost outside, her survival was unlikely. Although search teams would continue to scour the area for any sign of Leeanna, detectives began to focus on the possibility of foul play. They interviewed anyone who had been in recent contact with the child, and they began the process of checking up on all the registered sex offenders in the area. There had been a jazz festival taking place in Chisholm during the time when Leeanna was last seen, and several groups of bikers had arrived around the same time to attend a large motorcycle rally. Although detectives had no reason to suspect that anyone from these events had been involved in Leeanna's disappearance, they weren't taking any chances. They gathered motel guest registries for the weekend and obtained the names of anyone who had been staying in a local campground. They went through surveillance tapes taken from local businesses, looking for anything that might help lead them to the missing girl. It was a long and tedious process, and they were unable to find any evidence related to their case. As the investigation entered its second week, police insinuated that Leeanna had most likely been abducted. They told the media that there was no way a small child would be able to remain hidden for this length of time without having help from an adult, and they believed that she was most likely not in the Chisholm area. Detectives admitted that they had felt from the beginning that she had been taken by someone, but felt the need to thoroughly investigate the possibility that she might have wandered off. That theory was eliminated after the extensive search indicated that she was no longer in the area. Due to the size of the neighborhood and the amount of people who had been around the day that Leeanna disappeared, investigators had a hard time believing that no one had seen anything. Convinced that someone in the area knew something about what happened, they announced that a $10,000 reward was being offered for information leading to Leeanna's recovery. They also asked residents to watch out for anyone they knew who suddenly began exhibiting changes in behavior that might indicate they had been involved in the crime. Signs to look for included increased alcohol or drug abuse, drastic changes in appearance, and unexpected time away from work. In August 2003, Matthew James Curtis, a 24-year-old resident of Chisholm, was arrested for possessing child pornography. Although there was nothing linking him to Leeanna, he was questioned by detectives on several occasions. He denied having anything to do with her disappearance. Investigators searched his residence and conducted forensic tests on his vehicle, but they found nothing to indicate Leeanna had ever been in his home or car. He was later found dead of an apparent suicide one day before he was supposed to appear in court on the child pornography charges. Police told the media that his death had no impact on their investigation. He had been dismissed as a suspect after police received the results of the forensic testing. They do not believe his suicide had anything to do with Leeanna. In the first 50 days of the investigation, law enforcement had investigated 1,300 tips without developing any solid leads. Experienced officers noted that they had never seen a case where there was so little to go on. It was as if Leeanna had simply vaporized. They had absolutely no evidence at all. They had extensively interviewed all of her family members, neighbors, and friends. They could find nothing connecting anyone to Leeanna's disappearance, which led them to believe that she had been kidnapped by a stranger. Stranger abductions, thankfully, rarely take place. They are notoriously hard to investigate, and solving one usually requires a person with information about the crime coming forward to tell police what they know. Keeping this in mind, police again made a public plea for help. Several people had come forward early in the investigation to report seeing strange vehicles in the area on the day that Leeanna went missing. Police looked into all the reports, but were unable to link any to the missing girl. They noted that there were several events going on at the time, and the strange cars likely belonged to someone attending one of them. Chris and Kaylin had suspected from the beginning that Leeanna had been kidnapped, but having police confirm their worst fears was still a shock. They knew that successfully recovering the victim of stranger abduction was rare, but they were comforted by the fact that Leeanna's body had not been found. They continued to hope that she was still alive, and they were willing to do whatever was necessary to find her. In the earliest stages of the investigation, there were some people who were extremely critical of Kaylin's failure to call the police until Leeanna had been missing for over 3 hours. Although in hindsight she wished she had called sooner, Kaylin defended her actions that night. Like most residents of Chisholm, she had always had an illusion of safety that is common in people who are insulated from danger. Crime was viewed as an urban problem, not something that would occur on the streets of their neighborhood. Leeanna had so many friends that Kaylin kept thinking that her daughter would be behind the next door she knocked on. By the time she realized that Leeanna truly was missing, hours had gone by. Even after she called the police, she had trouble believing that the little girl was really gone. Chris and Kaylin made another public plea on the 1-year anniversary of Leeanna's disappearance. They believed that she was still alive, and hoped that the person who had taken her might feel guilty about what he had done and finally bring her home, or at least contact them so they would know she was okay. They noted that her disappearance had been devastating to them and to Leeanna's entire extended family. Chris, who was a firefighter, had taken a 6-month leave of absence from his job when his daughter first went missing, and he still had days where he found it difficult to get out of bed. He felt an enormous amount of guilt that he hadn't been able to protect his little girl. In July 2004, Chris and Kaylin worked with a private investigator and 200 volunteers to conduct the first massive search for Leeanna in nearly a year. Bob Hales, a well-known private detective, explained that they intended to cover a 12-square-mile radius around the area where Leeanna was last seen. Volunteers were shown diagrams of human bones and warned that they were no longer looking for the Leeanna shown in photographs. If the child were still alive, they weren't going to find her in the places they were looking. This was a search for her remains. It was difficult for her parents to hear this, but they were participating in the search because they wanted to find closure one way or the other. Volunteers spent 2 days scouring wooded areas for anything related to Leeanna, a piece of her denim dress, a shred of her orange underwear, perhaps the gold heart necklace she had been wearing. They looked for any strange mounds or areas of disturbed earth that might indicate a grave. Chris and Kaylin worked side by side with the other members of the search party, praying for answers yet not wanting to believe that Leeanna was no longer alive. In the end, they didn't find any evidence of the little girl. Volunteers would continue to hold sporadic searches throughout the Chisholm area, but they had no luck finding anything that led them closer to Leeanna. When deer hunting season began, hunters were asked to keep an eye out for anything unusual in the deep woods. They too failed to find anything. No one wanted to admit it, but it was clear that Leeanna's case was starting to go cold. While Leeanna's disappearance was front-page news in the Chisholm area, it failed to attract the attention of the national news media. In an effort to publicize the case, Chris and Kaylin appeared on Maury in 2006. They mentioned that Leeanna had been acting somewhat odd in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. One day she had returned home from playing with friends carrying a doll case. Inside were several Barbie dolls and articles of doll clothing, none of which Chris and Kaylin had seen before. When they asked Leeanna where the items had come from, she insisted that they had been given to her by a little old lady. They had relayed this information to police after Leeanna went missing, but police did not believe that the items had any relevance to the case. One morning, about 2 weeks before she disappeared, Leeanna wasn't in her bed when Kaylin went in to wake her up. She found her daughter sleeping on the floor in her closet. Leeanna told her parents that there had been monsters outside her bedroom window and she was hiding from them. Her parents checked outside the window to see if there were any footprints underneath it, but nothing appeared to be disturbed. The next time Leeanna mentioned it, they promised her that there was no way the monsters could get her. A week before she went missing, Leeanna made a comment that disturbed her parents. She had packed some of her things in a small suitcase, and then announced that she wanted to go live with her new family. Unsure what she was talking about, they asked her about this new family, but Leeanna offered no further details and didn't bring the subject up again. Police were aware of these incidents, but it was hard to tell if they were related to her disappearance or if they were just random thoughts from the mind of a 5-year-old. They were unable to come up with any evidence that someone had been giving Leeanna gifts in an attempt to groom her in some way, and finally concluded that it was unlikely. No one in the neighborhood could recall seeing Leeanna talking to anyone unfamiliar. Leeanna has been missing for over 18 years now, and investigators still have no idea what happened to the little girl on her walk home that summer afternoon. They do believe there are people out there that can shed some light on this mystery and provide them with the information they need to finally solve this case. Chris and Kaylin have never stopped searching for their daughter, and want nothing more than to finally be able to bring her home. Leeanna Warner was 5 years old when she went missing in 2003. She has dark brown eyes and brown hair, and at the time of her disappearance she was 3 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 48 pounds. She has a dimple on the back of her left shoulder and a wart above her left ankle. She was last seen wearing a sleeveless blue denim dress with an attached belt, bright orange Hanes panties, and a red garnet earring shaped like a flower. Both of her ears are pierced, but she was only wearing an earring in her right ear on the day she disappeared. She was not wearing any shoes or socks. If you have any information about Leeanna, please call the Chisholm Police Department at 218-254-7915. Leeanna was just 5 years old when she disappeared while on her way to a friend's house on June 14, 2003. Local law enforcement and the Chisholm community began an extensive search and investigation for her, and authorities believed she had been abducted. There has been national publicity about Leeanna's case then, and continuing over the years. It is still unknown what happened despite efforts to find her or information about her disappearance. According to the NCMEC, Leeanna's sisters, Carly Van Loo and Whitney Shupp, have taken up the fight to find Leeanna. Their mother, Kaylin Warner, died in 2022 of stage 4 lung cancer. Carly and Whitney have provided their DNA and genetic testing in the hopes that it would lead to finding Leeanna. A blog on NCMEC says the sisters also submitted their DNA to 23andMe, which helps people learn about their ancestry. Leeanna's sisters ask anyone who may think they might be Leeanna to submit their DNA for testing. According to our reports over the years, authorities have checked on thousands of leads, and investigators say there have been a few persons of interest, but no suspects. In 2013, Leeanna's mom told WDIO News that they believe she is still alive, and that there are no words for the emotion that will come when the family sees her again. There's no evidence to show she's no longer with us, so you've got to believe that she is, Kaylin said. Billboards around the Chisholm area will display the new progression image with the hope that someone will recognize the likeness and that Leeanna can be found. If you have information about Leeanna's disappearance, call 1-800-843-5678. To learn about missing children in your community, you can search here, https://www.missingkids.org/gethelpnow/search. A story from National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. A mother's dying plea, find your little sister. April 11, 2024. 5-year-old Leeanna Warner was a spitfire, a bundle of contradictions like so many little girls her age. She was totally fearless and pure tomboy, liked playing in the mud, hated wearing shoes. Yet, she was also a girly girl who would sneak her older sister's lipstick, loved playing with Barbies, and always wore her sparkly princess crown. One warm Saturday, After spending the day at garage sales with her mom and 10-year-old sister Carly, then cooling off at their friend's lake house, Leeanna took off to play with a friend before dinner. When she was late coming home, her mom sent Carly to look for her. She had seen her little sister walking, pretty sure barefooted, to her friend's house just a block over. But Carly couldn't find her, and her mom was starting to panic. Emotions were high. Carly recalled of that day, June 14, 2003, when she hopped back on her bike to rejoin the growing search in their small town of Chisholm, Minnesota. I'm crying, riding my little bike all around town, screaming her name. And it was a lot. But I remember all of it. And then even to the point where it became nighttime and the whole block was just out in the street like, okay, what is going on? Today, nearly 21 years later, no one has figured out what was going on that day. They only know that Leeanna, affectionately known as Beaner because she was so tiny, like a bean, when she was born, is still missing. Despite intensive efforts to find her, despite national publicity about her disappearance, no one has a clue what happened to her or if she's even still alive. The presumption is that she was abducted. Here at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, we've just released a new age progression of what Leeanna might look like today. Now her sisters, Carly Van Loo and Whitney Shupp, 31 and 30 respectively, who were just children themselves when their sister disappeared and weren't even sure what being kidnapped meant, have taken over the search for Leeanna, who would be 26 years old now. Their mother, Kaylin Warner, died of stage 4 lung cancer on December 10, 2022, just 42 days after she was diagnosed. Finding Leeanna was her dying wish. I remember she was crying hysterically, Whitney said of her mother, who expressed her wishes before she went to the hospital. I'm not dying. I'm not dying. But if I do die, I need you and Carly to find your sister. Give us the answers that we need. Don't stop searching. Bring her home. That's all I want from you. That's all I need from you. The sister said Leeanna's disappearance completely broke their mother, and she was never the same. When Leeanna disappeared, their mother sat on the front steps for many nights with the porch light on, waiting for her youngest child to come home. She tried to shield her daughters from details of the investigation and from being even more traumatized by all the TV trucks, search dogs and flashing emergency lights. Carly lived at the house with Leeanna, their mother and Leeanna's dad, Chris Warner, who worked at one of the mines that surrounded the town and was a volunteer EMT. He was on duty when his daughter vanished and returned that night distraught. Carly and Whitney have a different dad, and Whitney, who was 9 at the time, lived with him. All three sisters were close growing up in the mining town, about 200 miles north of Minneapolis, known as the heart of the Iron Range with its towering Iron Men statue. They had the run of the place on their bikes, and neighbors looked out for each other's kids. It was a very friendly, very trusting small town, they said, and everyone loved Beaner. She was just full of so much charisma, personality, Whitney said of their little doll, who had a very active imagination. She could go from like ultimate tomboy to putting on, I don't even know how many dresses or skirts in a day, 15? If she could. I mean, we fought hard, as young sisters often do, but we loved harder for sure. No one was home at her friend's house, and her sisters don't know if Leeanna even made it there or where she might have gone after that. Leeanna's jelly shoes were found in front of the home, which some found suspicious. But, knowing Leeanna, who was always ditching her shoes, the sisters said they could have been left there at any time. Over the years, investigators have had a few persons of interest, but no suspects. The sisters now hope that DNA and genetic testing will lead them to Leeanna, that she is possibly still alive and was raised by someone who wanted a child. It's happened before. In 2022, with the help of DNA, a Texas woman was found alive and reunited with her biological family more than 50 years after she was abducted as a baby. The sisters have submitted their DNA to 23andMe, which helps people learn their ancestry, and they encourage anyone who believes they might be Leeanna to submit their DNA. Most of all, they want to get Leeanna's face and story out to the public in the hopes that someone who knows something will finally come forward. The new age progression created by one of NCMEC's forensic artists will be featured on billboards in Chisholm through the efforts of Missing Children Minnesota, a lifeline for the sisters, in the hopes of jogging someone's memory. Without their mother's guidance, it feels like they're starting from square one. But they made a promise to her and they intend to keep it. Until then, they'll always leave their porch lights on, If you have information about Leeanna's disappearance, call 1-800-843-5678. To learn about missing children in your community, you can search here, https://www.missingkids.org/gethelpnow/search. Leeanna has been missing for 22 years. Bring Leeanna home. Chisholm Police Department, Minnesota, 1-218-749-6010, or Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Minnesota, 1-651-793-7000. NCMEC, 965,221.
One was home at her friend's house, and her sisters don't know if Leeanna even made it there or where she might have gone after that. Leeanna's jelly shoes were found in front of the home, which some found suspicious. But, knowing Leeanna, who was always ditching her shoes, the sisters said they could have been left there at any time. Over the years, investigators have had a few persons of interest, but no suspects. The sisters now hope that DNA and genetic testing will lead them to Leeanna, that she is possibly still alive and was raised by someone who wanted a child. It's happened before. In 2022, with the help of DNA, a Texas woman was found alive and reunited with her biological family more than 50 years after she was abducted as a baby. The sisters have submitted their DNA to 23andMe, which helps people learn their ancestry, and they encourage anyone who believes they might be Leeanna to submit their DNA. Most of all, they want to get Leeanna's face and story out to the public in the hopes that someone who knows something will finally come forward. The new age progression created by one of NCMEC's forensic artists will be featured on billboards in Chisholm through the efforts of Missing Children Minnesota, a lifeline for the sisters, in the hopes of jogging someone's memory. Without their mother's guidance, it feels like they're starting from square one, but they made a promise to her and they intend to keep it. Until then, they'll always leave their porch lights on. If you have information about Leeanna's disappearance, call 1-800-843-5678. To learn about missing children in your community, you can search here, https://www.missingkids.org/gethelpnow/search. Chisholm Police Department, Minnesota 1-218-749-6010 or Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Minnesota 1-651-793-7000. NCMEC, 965,221. Leeanna has been missing for 22 years.
Yeah. Everybody knows that I'm breaking down. Everybody knows I ain't faking now. Everybody knows my heart's vacant now. Yeah, she hates me now, I made mistakes but now I don't ever wanna be alone. I don't really ever feel at home. On my own, in the zone, that's the only way I know. Feeling low, about to blow back up. Here I won't ever let the doubt creep in. Gotta pop a couple more aspirin. I don't think I'll ever let you in. Easier to break it off best friends. I don't really understand myself. I don't really understand, need help. I don't wanna be left on the shelf. Couldn't even hear me if I yelled. It's so cold outside, I'm alone, I'm alright. It's so cold outside, I'm alone.